I never thought that decorating a Christmas tree would change my life so profoundly. It was just one evening during the holidays when everything felt calm. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, and the fire flickered warmly, casting a gentle glow in the room. It should have been another normal Christmas, the kind I had spent for years with William, but that night, everything changed. As I replay the events in my mind, I wonder if there was a point when I could have stopped it. Was it when Zayn handed me the ornament, his fingers grazing mine, or when we both reached for the same string of lights, laughing as our hands became tangled? Perhaps it was the way his eyes held mine, radiating a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Looking back, the signs were so clear, small things I ignored, moments I didn't want to face. But in that instant, standing so close to Zayn, it felt as if the world shrank to just the two of us. Caught in a moment that felt both destined and impossible. William had gone to bed early, as he often did. The years had taken their toll on him, and by 9 p.m., he was usually asleep while I stayed awake. That night, Zayn and I lingered to finish decorating the tree. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting playful shadows across the room, while a soft Christmas song played in the background. I hadn't planned on it. I didn't enter that room thinking I'd cross a line that would change everything. But as the night wore on, the ornaments found their places and the wine flowed a little too freely. Something shifted. I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was the way Zayn looked at me, not just as his stepmother, but as a woman, someone who had felt invisible for too long. Or perhaps it was how alive I felt around him, seen and wanted in ways I hadn't experienced in years. One moment, we were standing too close, our hands brushing as we reached for the same ornament. The next, the air between us felt thick, charged with something unspoken. I should have stopped it, should have stepped back, laughed it off and gone to bed. But I didn't. Since then, I've spent countless nights trying to understand that moment. Was it loneliness, desire, or merely a mistake? Whatever it was, it set off a chain of events I couldn't control. Now, every Christmas, when I see a tree adorned with ornaments and lights, I think of that night, of Zayn, and of what we shared, of how one innocent moment turned into a memory I will never forget. The holiday season has a way of masking what's broken, wrapping it in tinsel and lights until it almost seems whole again. That is what I had hoped for. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, a season that reminded me of better days. Yet, even the most beautiful decorations couldn't mask the cracks in my life. William and I had been married for 15 years when I first met him. With his quiet strength and the stability I needed after my divorce, he swept me off my feet. However, as time passed, that stability began to feel more like complacency. Although William was a good man, our marriage had grown stale. We shared a home and space, yet it felt as if we were separated by a wall, each of us uncertain about how to bridge the divide. Most nights, he would doze off in his recliner with the TV humming softly in the background. The spark that once ignited our relationship had dulled into something lukewarm, comfortable, but I told myself this was a natural evolution in marriage, and that I should feel grateful for what we had. Still, gratitude did little to fill the emptiness gnawing at me. Then Zayn came home. Zayn, William's son from his first marriage, had not lived with us since his teenage years when William and I got married. Now 28, Zayn had transformed from the boy I remembered into a confident, self-assured man. He had spent years working as a graphic designer in the city, but when his company laid him off, he decided to return home for the holidays. "It's just temporary," he assured William over the phone. "I'll be gone by January." William welcomed him with open arms, eager to reconnect with his son. Zayn's return was a shock and disrupted our routine in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had expected him to stay only a few days, but he lingered longer than I thought possible. From the moment he arrived, Zayn infused our home with a new energy. He wasn't loud or overbearing, rather he had a unique ability to draw attention without even trying. Thoughtful and quick-witted, he noticed things William often overlooked. "You're really going all out this year," Zayn remarked one evening as he observed me hanging garlands along the staircase. "It's tradition," I replied, shrugging. "I like to make the house feel festive." "You do a good job of it," he said with a warm smile. "It feels nice to come back to something that feels like home." His words took me by surprise. I hadn't received a genuine compliment in ages. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with the familiar hustle and bustle, with William preoccupied by errands and catch-ups with friends. This left Zayn and me to manage the decorations together. I poured myself into the task, determined to make everything perfect. Zayn proved to be surprisingly helpful, unpacking ornaments, untangling strings of lights, and even climbing onto the roof to hang the outdoor decorations. We worked side by side, and though the tasks were routine, they felt lighter with his presence. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old ornaments, we came across a dusty ceramic angel with one chipped wing. "I remember this," Zayn said, holding it up. "Mom loved this angel." I paused, unsure how to respond. Zayn's mother was a subject we rarely discussed. A ghost lingered in the background. As we sorted through the ornaments, Zayn continued to smile wistfully. "Do you think that's true?" he asked, recalling how she mentioned the angel brought good luck. I hesitated, then replied, "Maybe it brought her comfort sometimes." That seemed to satisfy him. He nodded and placed the angel carefully on the mantel. As the days passed, I noticed things about Zayn that I hadn't before. The way he lit up a room with his smile, the softness of his voice when he spoke to me. It wasn't just his attractiveness that drew me in, it was how I felt seen and appreciated in his presence, how I mattered in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I tried to dismiss it as mere imagination, questioning whether I was reading too much into his gestures and words. Yet there were moments that made me reconsider everything. Like when we both reached for the same strand of lights, the brief touch of our hands sending a shock through me, or when his gaze lingered on me. Unaware that I was watching, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years, and it terrified me. The Christmas tree was the centerpiece of our holiday decorations, and this year was no exception. William insisted on getting the biggest tree we could fit in the living room. With Zayn's help, he hauled it inside while I set up the stand. By the time the tree was in place, William was ready to call it a night. "You two can handle the decorations," he said with a yawn. "I'm beat." Zayn and I shared a knowing look, both amused by William's predictability. As he headed upstairs, I greeted the quiet that settled in the living room. We began working together in silence, hanging ornaments and stringing lights. The fire crackled softly while the first light snow began to fall outside, the flakes dancing in the glow of the window behind the tree. "This reminds me of when I was a kid," Zayn said, breaking the silence. "Decorating the tree?" I asked, and he nodded. "It was always a big deal," he reminisced. "Mom would bake cookies, and we'd stay up late hanging ornaments. She'd always let me put the star on top." "Sounds like a nice tradition," I responded, feeling the warmth of his memories. "I didn't think I'd miss it, but being here, it's nice," he said, his voice quieter now. His words stirred something in me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. As the evening wore on, the space between us seemed to shrink with every ornament we hung. We laughed about old memories and shared stories, momentarily overshadowing the weight of unspoken years. Zayn handed me a glass ornament shaped like a snowflake. When his fingers brushed against mine as he passed it over, that brief touch sent an electric shiver through me. "You okay?" he asked softly, his tone laced with concern. "Yeah," I replied quickly, avoiding his gaze, though I knew I wasn't okay. Something was shifting between us, an unspoken tension that made the air feel heavier. We stood too close, his warmth enveloping me, the scent of pine mingling with a hint of citrus clinging to him. Neither of us moved. "Grace, I'm here," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced up, feeling my heart pound in my chest. Zayn's presence loomed larger than life, and words felt trapped in my throat. He handed me a glass ornament shaped like a delicate snowflake, brushing my fingers as he passed it over. The fleeting touch sent an electric shiver down my spine. "You okay?" he asked again. "Yeah, I'm okay," I managed, though the words felt hollow. I still couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was unfolding between us, something I struggled to comprehend. The tree was nearly finished when Zayn climbed the ladder to place the star atop it. As he reached up, the ladder wobbled slightly, prompting me to instinctively reach out for support. "Careful," I said, my voice tight with concern. He laughed, glancing down at me. "I've got it," he assured me. We were standing too close again. The heat radiating from him mixed with the fragrance of pine and citrus filled the space between us. For that moment, nothing else existed. I felt my breath hitch as the world around us faded. "Grace," he said softly, almost a plea. I looked up, heart racing, words caught in my throat once more. The night had taken on a dreamlike quality. The living room shimmered with the soft glow of Christmas ornaments, like tiny jewels against the backdrop of the crackling fire, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Zayn stood close, towering over me, and for a moment, I could barely think straight. "I should put these away," I suggested, gesturing to the box of leftover ornaments. My voice sounded strained, even to my own ears. Zayn remained still, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that held my gaze captive. "You don't have to keep running, Grace," he said, the weight of his words pressing down on us. "I'm not running," I protested, though the tremble in my hands betrayed me. "I'm not running," I repeated, trying to inject indifference into my tone, but Zayn's searching gaze only deepened the weight of the moment. "You are," he responded, leaning casually against the couch, arms folded. "I've seen it from the moment I arrived, how you're always busy, never pausing, always doing something." His words hung in the air, a silent accusation that pierced through my defenses. His words struck too close to home, and I found myself unprepared to confront the truth he represented. I began to organize the ornaments on the table, even though they didn't need arranging. "Why do you care?" I asked, trying to mask my vulnerability with indifference. Zayn hesitated before stepping closer. "Because I see you, Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Those words resonated deeply, awakening feelings I wasn't ready to face. Now, and I don't think anyone else does. My breath caught in my chest, not just from the words but from the sincerity behind them. I realized in that moment that I hadn't truly been seen in years. William loved me, but his attention was always fleeting, never completely there. Yet here stood Zayn, acknowledging my existence so genuinely that it left me in awe. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. I attempted to step past Zayn, but he caught my wrist, his touch warm and reassuring. My heart raced as he urged me to open up, to share my struggles. I quickly dismissed his concern. "There's nothing to talk about. You're not happy," he replied, moving even closer. "I see it every time you look at him, every time you try to fill the silence with something else." "Zayn, this isn't your concern," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe not," he retorted, his voice low but steady. "But I can't ignore it." His words hung heavily in the air, unspoken yet palpable. The tension crackled between us like a taut wire ready to snap. I should have walked away, instructed him to stop, but I found myself frozen, unable to move as a whirlwind of emotions spun within me. Then, in a single heartbeat, everything changed. One moment we were standing too close together, his hand still lightly clutching my wrist, and in the next, his lips were on mine, soft and searching. I was too surprised to react initially, stunned into stillness. But then, something deep within me stirred, a longing for connection and passion that had been dormant for far too long. I kissed him back, the box of ornaments slipping from my hands as I reached up to touch his face. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer, and for that fleeting moment, nothing else existed but the two of us. Yet reality soon weighed down on me, and I pulled away, my breath unsteady as I stepped back. "Zayn, we can't do this," I said, my voice shaky. "Why not?" he asked, his tone steady yet charged with emotion. "Because it's wrong," I insisted, shaking my head. "You're William's son, and I'm his. I can't do this." Zayn's expression was unreadable, a mixture of determination and defiance flickering in his eyes. "Do you think I'm oblivious to that?" he asked quietly. "Tell me. Did it feel wrong to you?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't even find the words. Instead, I fled to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I leaned against the counter, replaying the kiss in my mind. What had I done? How had I let it go this far? Zayn didn't follow me, and I was grateful for it. I needed space to think, to breathe, to sort through the chaos of emotions swirling within me, but as guilt settled over me like a heavy blanket, I couldn't ignore the lingering echo of what had just transpired. My heart had leapt with joy when he kissed me, awakening a sense of life in me that had been dormant for years. I stayed up late that night, unable to sleep, my mind racing through the implications of our unthinkable moment. William was snoring softly in the bedroom, completely unaware of the chaos that had unfolded downstairs. I sat by the fire, staring at the dancing flames, my thoughts a tangled mess. My heart had leapt when he kissed me, filling me with a sense of aliveness I hadn't felt in years. I stayed up late, unable to shake the weight of what had happened. When Zayn finally came downstairs, he said nothing. He simply sat in the armchair across from me, his presence an unspoken reminder of our shared moment. "Are you okay?" he asked after a long silence. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Zayn leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Grace, I'm sorry if I crossed a line." "I didn't mean to," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. I interrupted him, surprising myself. "It's not your fault, Zayn. I should have stopped it before it started." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret it?" he asked, the weight of the question thick in the air. I hesitated, feeling the depth of the inquiry. I don't know, I finally replied. I don't know what to feel right now. We didn't mention the kiss again after that night, but everything between us had changed. Every glance, every touch seemed charged with an electric energy I couldn't ignore. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a moment we both regretted. Yet, as the days passed, my heart told a different story. The next morning, while decorating for Christmas, Zayn caught my eye and smiled. It was a small, subtle gesture, unnoticed by William, but it sent a thrill through me nonetheless. I knew I was playing with fire. It felt dangerous, and I sensed something was off, yet I couldn't quite identify it. I thought the kiss by the Christmas tree would be the end of it, a fleeting moment of weakness. But the days that followed proved me wrong. Though we didn't talk about it, the silence between us was thick with unspoken words. Every glance felt like a secret, every touch lingered too long, and each word carried more weight than it should have. William, oblivious to the shift, busily planned his upcoming fishing trip in January, a tradition he eagerly anticipated. You and Zayn have everything under control here, he laughed one evening, completely unaware of the tension that had developed between us. I hated myself for how I felt when William left us alone, but I couldn't deny the thrill Zayn brought into the room. I noticed the way his gaze followed me when he thought no one was looking, and how his voice softened whenever he spoke my name. The first crack in my resolve came the morning after our kiss, as I rolled out dough for Christmas cookies in the kitchen, trying desperately to focus on anything but the memory of Zayn's lips against mine. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in quiet, while inside, my heart raced with confusion and desire. I was trying really hard not to think about Zayn's kiss. Outside, snow blanketed the world in white, muffling the sounds of the quiet house. The only noise came from the heater. Zayn walked in, his voice warm and casual. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, keeping my focus on the counter as I made cookies. He leaned against the doorway, looking at me curiously. "Is that a tradition?" "It is," I said briskly. "William likes them." Zayn stepped closer, filling the room with his presence and making my heart race. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly. "I'm not," I replied, though I knew he could hear the lie in my voice. He leaned against the counter beside me, his arm brushing against mine. "You don't have to feel guilty, Grace," he added, and I froze, my hands still in the dough. "How could I not?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't regret it. I don't think you do either," he said, his gaze steady and challenging me to respond. But instead of replying, I returned to my work, my hands trembling as I shaped the dough. That afternoon, William had gone to town for last-minute gifts, leaving Zayn and me alone in the house. I was hanging stockings over the fireplace when Zayn walked in. "Need help?" he asked, his tone light. "I've got it," I replied, but the stocking hook slipped from my fingers. Zayn caught it before it hit the floor, his reflexes quick. "Grace," he said softly, stepping closer. I shook my head, my voice trembling. "We can't keep doing this." "I know," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of sadness. "I can't stop thinking about you, Zayn. Please," I whispered, feeling my resolve crumbling. Then he kissed me again. The next encounter happened during a snowstorm, while William was at a Christmas party hosted by an old college friend. As the snow fell heavily and the wind howled outside, Zayn and I worked together to check on the barn. William had mentioned the generator might need fuel. "I'll help," Zayn said, as he zipped up his coat. I was eager for an excuse to leave the house and clear my head. The barn was cold, filled with the scent of hay and wood. We worked in silence at first, filling the generator and checking the supplies William kept there. But as the wind howled outside, I could feel Zayn's gaze on me. The tension between us seemed to grow with each passing moment. "This feels like one of those Christmas movies," he said, breaking the silence. I laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" "Two people stuck together in a snowstorm,"